When darkness falls, only one light remains, the red warning light of Orbital Research Station Nexus. Prime cast eerie shadows across the corridor walls as Dr. Elena Rodriguez made her way to laboratory. Section C, her footsteps echoed through the metallic hallways. The only human sound in a facility that housed 12 different alien species. She had been on the station for exactly 37 days, and tonight would prove to be unlike any other. Elena paused at the reinforced viewing window of the main research bay. Inside, 6 juvenile creatures moved with fluid grace despite the artificial gravity. The Shadow Moors, as the research team had dubbed them, were unlike anything she had encountered in her 15 years as a xenobiologist. Each one was roughly the size of an earth wolf, but their bodies seemed to absorb light itself. Their skin shifted and rippled like liquid darkness, making them nearly invisible except for their glowing amber eyes. "Dr. Rodriguez," came a voice behind her. She turned to see Commander Zethkar, a towering Zenthari whose blue-scaled face showed obvious distress. His usually steady demeanor was replaced by something Elena had never seen before: fear. "The Council has made their decision. The Shadowmoor project is to be terminated immediately." Elena's heart sank. These creatures were juveniles, barely 3 months old. They had shown remarkable intelligence during her brief time observing them. They played together, comforted each other when separated, and had even begun to recognize her presence at feeding times. "Commander, with respect, these beings show clear signs of advanced cognitive development. They deserve further study, not extermination." Zethkar's mandibles clicked nervously. "Dr. Rodriguez, you do not understand. Adult Shadowmoors have been detected on the station's perimeter sensors. The juveniles you see here, they were taken from their families 6 months ago. The adults have come for them." Before Elena could respond, the station's emergency klaxon began wailing. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in a dim red glow that made the shadows seem alive. Elena's comm device crackled with panicked voices from across the station. "Hull breach in Section 7. Something's gotten inside. Security teams to all levels. We have multiple contacts moving through the ventilation system. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill." Commander Zethkar's eyes widened with terror as the reports continued flooding in. "They hunt in complete darkness," he whispered. "Perfect predators. No thermal signature, no sound, no scent. They are death itself, moving through shadows." Elena watched through the viewing window as the juvenile Shadowmoors became agitated, their amber eyes glowing brighter as they huddled together. They were calling out, making sounds she had never heard before, soft, melodic tones that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull. "They're calling to their parents," Elena realized. "Commander, these creatures aren't mindless predators. They're a family unit." But when she turned around, Zethkar was gone. The corridor stood empty except for the flashing emergency lights and the distant sounds of chaos echoing through the station's communication system. Elena was alone. Her comm device buzzed with a facility-wide announcement from the acting commander, a Kelvaxian named Torex, whose usual calm had been replaced by barely controlled panic. "All personnel evacuate to the secure zones immediately. Automated systems will seal all research sections in 10 minutes. Anyone remaining will be considered lost." Elena looked back at the juveniles. They were pressed against the viewing window now, their eyes fixed on her. She could see intelligence there, awareness and something else, hope. They recognized her as the one who had been kind to them, who would spend hours observing their behavior with genuine curiosity rather than clinical detachment. The sound of tearing metal echoed from somewhere in the ventilation system above. Whatever was hunting through the station was getting closer. Elena's rational mind screamed at her to run, to follow evacuation protocols, to save herself. But her heart wouldn't let her abandon these young creatures to whatever fate awaited them. She keyed in her access codes and entered the research bay. The juveniles immediately surrounded her, not threateningly, but protectively. Their warm bodies pressed against her legs as she knelt down among them. Up close, she could see that their dark skin wasn't completely black. It shimmered with subtle patterns, like oil on water. Beautiful and mesmerizing. "It's okay," she whispered, reaching out to gently touch the nearest juvenile. Its skin was surprisingly warm and soft, not cold and scaly as she had expected. "I won't leave you alone." The station shuddered as something massive impacted the outer hull. Through the research bay's reinforced windows, Alina could see space itself seem to move and writhe. Then she realized what she was seeing. Adult shadowmoors, each one easily 3 times the size of the juveniles, moving across the station's exterior with impossible grace. They were boarding through the damaged hull sections, flowing like liquid night through tears in the metal. The juveniles' calling became more intense, and Alina heard answering calls from somewhere deep within the station. The adult shadowmoors were responding, following the sound of their young. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. This wasn't a random attack. This was a rescue mission. Asterisk, her comm device crackled one final time before the signal cut out entirely. Security teams, fall back to final defensive positions. Authorization given for use of quantum disruptors. Eliminate all shadowmoor specimens on site. Elena's blood ran cold. Quantum disruptors would turn every living thing in their blast radius into component atoms. The security teams weren't planning to capture or contain the shadowmoors. They intended to completely annihilate them and anyone. Nearby, the laboratory's main door buckled inward as something struck it from the outside. The reinforced metal groaned and began to tear like paper. Alina pulled the juveniles behind her, placing herself between them and whatever was about to enter. Her hands shook, but her resolve remained firm. The door finally gave way with a thunderous crash, and darkness itself seemed to pour into the room. Alina couldn't see the adult shadowmoors. Clearly, they moved too fluidly, too perfectly adapted to the dim emergency lighting. But she could feel their presence, ancient and powerful and utterly alien. One of them materialized directly in front of her, so close she could feel its breath on her face. Its eyes were like golden stars in the darkness, intelligent and searching. Alina forced herself to remain still as the creature studied her, knowing that any sudden movement might be interpreted as a threat. Behind her, the juveniles pressed closer, their soft calls growing more urgent. The adult shadowmoor's head tilted as it listened to its young, then those golden eyes fixed on Alina again. She could see the question in that gaze. Why was this strange creature protecting their offspring? Alina slowly, carefully, placed her hands on the nearest juveniles, stroking their warm skin gently. "I won't hurt them," she said softly, knowing the shadowmoor couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone might convey her meaning. "They're beautiful. They're intelligent. They deserve to live." The adult shadowmoor moved closer, and Alina caught her first clear glimpse of its full form. It was magnificent, sleek and powerful, with the same shimmering dark skin as the juveniles, but marked with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story across its hide. This was no mindless predator. This was a being of intelligence and purpose, driven by the most universal of motivations, love for its family. More adult shadowmoors flowed into the laboratory, but they didn't attack. Instead, they formed a protective circle around Alina and the juveniles. The young ones broke free from Elena's protective embrace and rushed toward their parents, their joyful calls filling the air as families were reunited. Alina found herself at the center of something unprecedented, a human surrounded by the galaxy's most feared predators, all of them treating her not as a threat but as a protector of their young. The largest of the adults, obviously the pack leader, approached her directly. It lowered its great head until it was level with hers, and those golden eyes seemed to look straight into her soul, for a moment that lasted an eternity. Human and alien regarded each other with mutual respect. Alina saw intelligence that rivaled her own, emotions that transcended species barriers, and a nobility that shamed those who had branded these beings as mere animals. The Shadowmoor seemed to see something in her as well, a kindred spirit who valued life above personal safety. The moment was shattered by the sound of combat boots in the corridor outside. Security teams were approaching, their weapons powered up and ready to fire. Alina heard the distinctive whine of quantum disruptors charging, weapons capable of erasing everything in this laboratory from existence. Targets confirmed in Laboratory Section C, came a harsh voice through a COM speaker. All personnel clear the area for disruptor deployment in 30 seconds. Alina looked at the Shadowmoor surrounding her. The adults had positioned themselves between their young and the approaching threat, ready to fight to the death if necessary. But quantum disruptors didn't discriminate. They would kill everything in their radius, parents and children alike. She had 30 seconds to make the most important decision of her life. In the heart of darkness, humanity's light shines brightest. Lina Rodriguez had faced many challenges in her career as a xenobiologist, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Standing in the center of a protective circle formed by the galaxy's most feared predators, she watched as the juvenile Shadowmoors pressed close to their parents. The adult creature's eyes glowed with fierce protectiveness, and Alina could feel their readiness to fight against impossible odds for their young. 20 seconds to disruptor deployment echoed through the laboratory's COM system. The security team outside had no idea what they were about to destroy. Not mindless beasts, but a family trying to rescue their stolen children. Alina made her choice. She stepped forward, placing herself directly between the Shadowmoors and the laboratory's entrance. Her hands spread wide in a gesture of protection that transcended species boundaries. Behind her, the pack leader made a sound deep in its throat, not a growl, but something that sounded almost like a question. "Computer," Alina called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Override laboratory lockdown. Authorization Rodriguez, 77 Alpha." The laboratory's main lighting suddenly blazed to life, and Alina heard gasps from the security team outside as they got their first clear view through the transparent aluminum windows. She stood in the center of what should have been a massacre scene, but instead looked like something from a dream. Adult Shadowmoors surrounded her protectively while their young played at her feet, completely unafraid. "Hold fire," came a shocked voice from the corridor. "The humans still alive in there." Alina activated the laboratory's external communication system. Her voice echoed through the station's corridors as she spoke directly to the security teams and command staff. "This is Dr. Elena Rodriguez. I am unharmed and under the protection of beings whose intelligence and nobility shame anyone who would call them mere predators." Through the viewing windows, she could see the security team's confusion. Zenthari, Calvaxian, and Threx soldiers stood with weapons ready, but their targets weren't behaving as expected. The Shadowmoors weren't attacking or threatening anyone. They were simply protecting their family. The largest adult Shadowmoor moved to Elena's side, its massive form somehow managing to convey both power and gentleness. It lowered its head toward her, and Elena reached up to place her hand against the warm, shimmering skin of its neck. The gesture sent ripples of shock through the watching security forces. "Dr. Rodriguez," came Commander Zethkar's voice through the comm system, shaking with disbelief. "How are you still alive? These creatures are the most dangerous predators in known space." Elena looked directly at the viewing window where she could see Zethkar's blue-scaled face pressed against the glass. "They're not predators, Commander. They're parents. 6 months ago, someone from this station stole their children. They didn't come here to hunt. They came here to rescue their young." She gestured to the juveniles, who were now playfully tumbling around their parents' feet. "Look at them. Really look. See how the adults teach and guide them. See how they comfort each other. These beings have family structures, emotional bonds, and moral codes that put our own to shame." The pack leader made another sound, and Elena was startled to realize she was beginning to understand it. Not the words, there were no words, but the emotional content behind the vocalizations. The Shadowmoor was expressing gratitude, wonder, and something that might have been recognition of a kindred spirit. "That's impossible," came another voice, Dr. Van, the station's chief researcher and the one Elena suspected had authorized the theft of the juveniles. "The Shadowmoors have no higher intelligence. They're valuable only for their hunting capabilities and stealth technology applications." Elena's eyes blazed with anger as she realized the full scope of what had been happening. On Nexus Prime, this wasn't a research station at all, was it? You've been breeding them, taking their children to turn into weapons. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. The adult Shadowmoors around her seemed to sense her emotional change, their own postures shifting to something more alert and dangerous. They had understood enough of what was happening to know that this human female was angry on their behalf. "Dr. Rodriguez," Commander Zethkar's voice carried a warning tone. "You need to step away from those creatures. Our xenobiologists have studied Shadowmoor behavior extensively. They will turn on you the moment they perceive you as a threat to their young." Elena laughed, and the sound carried no humor. "Turn on me. Commander, I'm probably the first person on this station who's treated their children with basic decency. They know I'm not their enemy." To prove her point, Elena knelt down among the juveniles. They immediately surrounded her, their soft cores of contentment filling the air. She gently stroked their shimmering skin while their parents watched with what could only be described as approval. "The real question," Elena continued, standing back up with a juvenile Shadowmoor cradled in her arms like a puppy, "is what happens now. You've committed an act of war against their species by stealing their young. They have every right to reclaim their children and seek justice for what was done to them." The adult Shadowmoors had arranged themselves in a formation that Elena was beginning to recognize as both defensive and ceremonial. The pack leader stepped forward and made a complex series of sounds while touching Alina gently with one massive claw. She felt a strange warmth spread from the point of contact, and suddenly she could sense the emotional state of every Shadowmoor in the room. They were asking her to speak for them. Alina set down the juvenile and faced the viewing windows where she could see dozens of station personnel watching in fascination and terror. The Shadowmoors want to make an agreement. They will take their children and leave peacefully, but only if you guarantee that no more of their kind will be taken for your weapons programs. We cannot negotiate with alien predators. Dr. Vanthara's voice carried absolute certainty. Security, prepared to flood the laboratory with knockout gas. We'll sort this out once everyone inside is unconscious. The pack leader's eyes flared with golden fire at the hostile tone, and Alina felt a wave of protective rage flow through the connection she had somehow formed with them. But instead of preparing to attack, the adult Shadowmoors did something that stunned everyone watching. They began to sing. The sound started low and deep, reverberating through the station's hull like distant thunder. Other adult voices joined in, creating harmonies that spoke of love, loss, hope, and determination. Alina felt tears streaming down her face as she experienced the full emotional weight of their song. A lament for stolen children, a celebration of their reunion, and a plea for understanding that transcended language barriers. Asterisk through the viewing windows. She could see the effect on the watching aliens. Centauri soldiers were lowering their weapons with expressions of wonder. Calvaxian researchers were frantically taking recordings while tears ran down their scaled faces. Even the normally stoic Threx security officers stood transfixed by the beauty of the Shadowmoors' song. "They're not animals," someone whispered. Through the cum system, Alina felt the moment of change ripple through the station. Fear was being replaced by understanding, hatred by wonder. The juvenile Shadowmoors had joined their parents' song now, their higher voices weaving through the adult harmonies like threads of pure light. When the song ended, the silence that followed carried weight. Alina could feel the shift in the station's atmosphere, the recognition that everything they thought they knew about Shadowmoors had been wrong. Commander Zethkar was the first to speak. "Dr. Rodriguez, are you willing to serve as a translator for formal negotiations?" Alina felt the pack leader's agreement flow through their strange connection. "Yes, Commander. But first, the families need to be reunited. There are more juveniles being held in other sections of the station, aren't there?" Dr. Venthara's protests were drowned out by Commander Zethkar's orders to security teams throughout Nexus Prime. Within an hour, 17 more juvenile Shadowmoors had been brought to the main laboratory, where they were joyfully reunited with their parents. Alina served as intermediary, using her growing understanding of their emotional communication to facilitate the first peace treaty between humans and Shadowmoors. The terms were simple. The Shadowmoors would share certain non-violent applications of their natural abilities with the research community, while the galactic authorities would recognize their intelligence and grant them full protection under interspecies law. More importantly, Alina would serve as the first official human Shadowmoor liaison, establishing the foundation for future cooperation as the Shadowmoor families prepared to depart Nexus Prime. The pack leader approached Alina one final time. It touched her gently with one claw, and she felt a flood of gratitude and respect flow through their connection. But there was something else, an invitation, asterisk. Alina understood what was being offered. The Shadowmoors wanted her to come with them, to learn their ways and help build bridges between their species and the wider galactic community. It was an opportunity that would change not just her life, but the future of interspecies relations. She looked through the viewing windows at her fellow researchers, at the alien crew members who had spent the day learning that their fears were based on ignorance rather than fact. Then she looked at the Shadowmoors, whose golden eyes held wisdom and kindness that had been hidden in darkness for too long. Elena Rodriguez made her second life-changing decision in 24 hours. "Commander," she said into the CUM system, "I'll need to take an extended leave of absence. There's a lot we still need to learn about our new allies, and I think the best classroom is among the stars." The pack leader's eyes seemed to smile as Elena gathered her research notes and personal belongings. As the Shadowmoors prepared to phase through the station's hull, using abilities that science was only beginning to understand, Elena felt something she had never experienced before, the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The last image the station's cameras captured was of Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the first human to befriend the galaxy's most feared predators, disappearing into the void surrounded by creatures of living shadow who had learned that sometimes, in the darkest places, the brightest lights can be found in the most unexpected hearts. 6 months later, the first Interspecies Cooperation Council would be established with Elena as its human representative. The Shadowmoor Accords became the foundation for a new era of galactic diplomacy, proving that understanding could triumph over fear, and that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in conquering the darkness, but in bringing light to places where none had existed before, in the depths of space, among beings of living shadow. A human woman taught the galaxy that courage comes not from the absence of fear, but from choosing compassion despite it. The darkness was no longer something to be feared. It had become something beautiful.